Welcome to another Pixel Game Maker tutorial. Today's other runtime action we're going to go over is the move object runtime. And what makes this runtime unique versus the other move runtimes is with this one you can get a little more specific in where you're going to move the object. You can also change the speeds even though the speed might be set different in that current object state. And you can also specify a particular object to move, where the other move runtimes were about the object self. And then you have some really cool options such as attaching to the grid or stopping actions, stopping going to the next action before the movement's done, and various things like that. So let's get started. I'm going to click on the move object runtime. And let's look at the parameters real quick before we dive in. The first parameter is you're going to set the move method. So how are you going to move? Are you going to set the direction and move? You're going to move to coordinates? You're going to move to the center of another object? The next parameter is the move speed. So are you going to use the basic move parameters of that object you're moving? Are you going to tweak it a little bit? Or are you going to set a duration that you want to be at that destination? So in this case, it would take 1 second to move from where the object's currently at to its destination. The other parameter is the object to move. So are you going to select the object based off a group? Are you going to select the object based off an individual one? Or are you going to have some different things like objects touching this object or by a locked object? And then you have some options down here which we will get into. But first off, let's start with the base move method, which is set move direction. I'm going to change the angle to 270, and I'm going to decrease the dot count to 40. And I'm going to use the basic move parameter speed for now. And I'm going to keep the object to move to be a group, and specifically the player group. And I have two objects, a professor object and a chair object, and these are both in the player group. Professor is a controllable player. So if we were to hit OK and hit play test, we will see that both the professor and the chair are moving exactly how I wanted them, 270-degree angle and 40 pixels. All right, so I'm going to exit, go back to move object, and let's focus on the move speed parameter first and get this out of the way. So we had it to where it was going to use the move parameter based off the target's object, and it was going to use 100% of that parameter. So we can change this, and let's just go extreme. Let's go to 0% now, and let's hit OK, and let's hit play test. And you'll notice that both objects don't move, and that's because we have changed the move parameter in those particular objects, and it follows it. So if we're to exit, go back to move object, and we set a set duration until the target position, we can now say, okay, we don't want to use the move speed as far as how it moves across the map. We want to set a duration. So we want that object to be in its destination within this much time, which is nice for setting up cutscenes and other scenes that require more specified time. So we could say, first off, let's change this to a greater number like 60. And let's leave it at 1 second and see what it does. So if we were to hit OK and hit playtest, we'll see that it took a second to move 60 dots. And if we were to exit and change the duration to something more drastic like 0.2, hit OK and hit playtest, we'll see that the objects just zoom to their destination. So you can see how this could be a good tool to specify a time, make times match for cutscenes and stuff like that. Alright, so that's it for move speed. I'm going to click on use basic, and I'm going to just use 100% for the rest of this tutorial. And let's go to the next move method, which is to set the coordinate and move. Alright, so I've added this edit because they had fixed a couple things for set coordinate and move, and now I can finally make this video complete. You'll notice that there are a few more options as well. I'll touch on these briefly before going back to the original video. This is as of 1.0.5, and the previous video I made it in 1.0.2. So a few differences, but we'll keep going here. So set coordinate and move. This is where you can set the x and the y dot coordinate. There's a difference here. If we click OK and we go to scenes, we can see down here that you're given two sets of coordinates. You're given the grid coordinate on the left, and then you're given the basically pixel or dot coordinate on the right. And you'll see that the grid coordinate is 0, 0 right here, but you can see that the dot coordinates are changing 4, 6, 7, 8 as you're within this grid. So that is one thing to note, is that going back into here, that the coordinates are based off the dots. So by giving a coordinate of 0, 0, and if we were to play test, we will see that the player is going towards 0, 0 coordinate. Now it can't reach exactly 0, 0 because the the wall detection is hitting the edge of the scene, which is considered a default tile wall. So that's why it can't get all the way, but it's trying. And we can see that by if we go and we say, well, we want to move to 30, 30 now. And if we were to click playtest, we'll see that it moves to 30, 30, and then it stops. And do note that what it's moving to is it's moving based off the origin. So whatever the origin is where the coordinate is going to match. So keep that in mind. And now let's go to this option. Coordinates are display area based. And what this is referring to is basically the camera. That is it's going to make, based off your resolution or your camera size, those are the coordinates it's going to move to. Now it might be hard to understand this, but let's turn this option on, and I'm actually going to leave it at 0, 0, because we know that 0, 0 is the top left corner, right? So that's a good one to see how this plays out. So coordinates are display based, 0, 0 to the coordinate, and we'll click OK. And so let's go to scenes real quick and just give an example here. I'm going to go to the others tab and the camera, and I'm going to make the camera follow the chair object, right? And I think, yeah, I'll place them right there and right there, yep. And so the camera is going to shift a little bit because it's now following the chair. But since we have that display based, it's still going to try to hit the upper top left of the camera. So if I was to click play, we'll see that it did exactly that. Even though the camera shifted, let's say that I was to move the camera right here, and let's move the player right here, and I was to click play, we'll see that it went to the 0, 0 based off the display area. All right. Okay, so here's where it gets even cooler. Back in this, we can also do adjust for scrolling. And so with this option open, we can do a couple things. First off, we can go to the chair, and I've already pre-made a move object runtime where I'm moving the chair left, or right, sorry, moving it right 128 pixels at its normal speed, okay? Just a basic move right runtime. And it's going to do that right away. And our player, oops, we're doing this out of the move bot. Our player is still going to want to go to the 0, 0 coordinate of the display area, but now we're adding in adjust for scrolling. And I'll show you both ways, with adjust and without adjust. Okay, so the camera's following the chair. I know it's kind of confusing now. And you'll see that if I was to reset, the player is actually adjusting. It's not perfect, but it's adjusting based on the display area of that camera. Pretty cool. And we can see this really good if we click off adjust, and let's see what happens before we added that adjustment. It doesn't even try to adjust at all. It just literally goes straight to the 0, 0 of the last known display area. And that's pretty much it as far as this option goes. So now we can move to specified object. And in 1.0.5, they've given us a few options. You can do move to the center, move to the origin, or move to connection point, which is nice. So real quick, before we get back to the original video, I'll show you what the center and the origin means real quick. Click OK, go to animations, and I'm sure by now you know that the origin is set in the animation over here on the list, over here. So where the horizontal and vertical line intersect, that is the origin. So you could say that's where you want it to move to based. Or the center is this little red dot right here. And that's this as much as I can zoom in, so hopefully you can see this little red dot. And you set those in the individual frames right here, center X and center Y. Now, you have to do that for every frame, but it is nice because you can click the top one and shift click the bottom one, and you can adjust them all from there. So we have a few different options now on where to move to as far as moving to specified object goes. And now we can get back to the remainder of the video. And this move method does exactly what it says. It's going to move the object to the center of another object. So right here, you can select which object you want to move it to. Do note that you only get object self. For this particular case, you don't get parent object or locked object like you do in some other runtimes. And then you get the specific object. So in this case, I'm going to move the player groups to the move bot. And I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to hit playtest. And you'll see that the player groups move to the move bot and they move to their particular destinations. So we can go further and we can specify an adjusted X or Y coordinate. So if we were to adjust the Y coordinate by say 50 and we hit OK and we hit playtest, we'll see that the player groups go 50 pixels down from the move bot. So that is a way that we can specify the center of the object that we want it to move to. So with that said, we now learned the 3 move methods offered in Move Object. I'm going to click Set Direction to Move, and then we're going to come down to the Object to Move settings, where we have just been on the player group for now. If we were to pull this down, we could select from all groups, the 2 default groups, or any groups that we have created. For now, we're going to go to the next option here, which is going to let us set what object we want to move. So if we were to do the drop down menu, we could do object self, or we could select an actual object to move. If we did the object self, let's just say, and we hit OK, and we hit playtest, we will see that the object moved itself. Going to exit out, go back to move object. We're going to move to the next option here, which is called objects touching this object. And you'll notice that the sub option says exclude object groups. So I'm going to click off of these for now and just show you that any object that's touching this object will happen. And by touching, it means that the wall detections of the objects are touching. So if we were to hit OK, and let's go to scenes, I'm going to set this up just a little differently. I'm going to put the player as touching the move bot, and I'm going to put the chair as touching the move bot. And I'm not sure if that will be touching, but we'll give it a go. We'll hit playtest, and we'll see that the player was touching, but the chair wasn't. So the tile, if we hit F1 and go to debug wall detections, yeah, you'll see that I was a little off. So if I was to go up a bit like that and hit playtest, we'll see that they both move now because their wall detections were touching. So if we go back to objects and go back to object move or move object, we can see that we can exclude objects. So now if we click the add and we add that the player group is what we want to exclude, and we hit OK. And OK, and play test, we'll see that the objects don't move now because we excluded that particular group. So if we were to exit out, go back to move object and move on to the next option, which is objects locked by this object. If we were to hit OK, I'm going to get our scene back to normal here. Go like this and go like this. And if we were to hit playtest, you'll notice that nothing moves, and that is because we haven't locked the object yet. So just showing this so that we know that if you don't lock something, then nothing will happen. So the first thing we got to do is we need to lock an object. I have another video on this if you are interested in learning more. And we're going to lock let's do the professor. And we're going to hit OK. And again, we're going to move the lock object above the move object because we want it to lock first. And if we hit playtest, we will see that it moves the locked object now. Now if we exit this and go back into lock object, I want to show this behavior. If we were to set the group by the player group and we hit OK, so we lock the player group, and then in move object, we move the objects locked. If we hit playtest, we'll notice that both the professor and the chair, which are the same group, move. So that's something to consider, is that when you're locking groups, they will all move. So let's X out of here. Let's get rid of the lock object. And with this, we've learned all the different object to move types. So this is the 4 ways that we can select objects to move. And I'm going to set by a particular object, and I'm going to select the professor to move. And before we get into the options, I want to go over some of the things to consider when you are using this runtime as your movement type. For instance, the professor is a controllable player object. So if we were to hit OK and hit playtest and bring this up here, and I'm going to hit F5 to reset, you'll notice that it moved it just fine. But when I reset this time and I start moving right away, you'll notice that the movement stopped. So any kind of movement input from your controllable players, they will stop the runtime from going on. If we were to go back into move object, there'll be a few more things to consider. One is that tank and vehicle movement types will not work with these move methods. Again, you will have to use back and forth moving and turning for those particular movement types. Another thing to go over is that move speed. If the object's speed that you're trying to move is set to 0 in the state that it's in, then move speed percentage will not work no matter if you go higher than 100 or lower. For instance, if we clicked OK, or actually if we go back to move object and I'm going to move the chair this time, and if we go to the chair object and we say that we want the horizontal speed to be 0 and the vertical speed to be 0, which I've already set them, and we hit play, you'll see that the chair does not move. Now, if we went back to move object and we clicked on the set duration of the point 2 that it will move, and we hit OK and we hit play, then it will move the chair. So if you have a state with 0 move speed, then just remember that when you're going over the move speed parameter, you won't be able to use the percentage, but you will be able to use the duration. So one last thing to go over is the dot count. So when you are specifying a direction to move and you're setting the distance, this dot count is going to be continually going down as it's moving, essentially. And if the object gets to a portion of the screen it can't move anymore, then that dot count is going to be skipping as it tries to move. And it's going to go to the next dot that it could go. And then if it can't, it's going to skip that one. So it's going in dots, basically. If we up this to 120, we can see this example real well. I'm also going to change it back to using percentage for the speed. Click OK. Make sure that my chair is back up to 100, which it is. And if I hit playtest, and I move down right away so that we can see where 120 dots would end up, we see that this line right here is essentially 120 dots from where that chair started. So if I hit F5 and I just stay a little bit, let it hit me and then move up, for instance, you'll notice that it didn't go to this line. It went just a little bit past the player and then stopped. And that is because as it was, like I was trying to explain, as it was touching the player, the dot counts were still going down because it was trying to move. Just because it couldn't move, it was skipping them and going to the next one. That's why it only moved a little bit. If I was to hit F5 again and just stay here for a couple seconds and then move down, then that chair is not going to move at all because that dot count is complete. And then if I was to just stay for just a little bit, it would go almost to the line, but not quite to it. So that explains some of these things to think about as we're using these parameters here. Finally get to go to the options. Okay, so let's start first by just saying that these are all and so you can use as many of these options as you want and they will all take effect. So let's start with the match display direction to move direction. This is pretty straightforward. I'm going to use the professor for this one. And since I start in the left state, I'm going to move up. So I'll just use 0 for this case. And I'm just going to do a little bit of movement, 20 dots. And I'm going to hit OK and hit play. You'll see that it faced me up as it moved me up. Normally, by default, I'm facing left, or the professor's facing left. So now we can go back and click this one off, and now let's click Hide Object during move. Again, this option is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to hide the object while it's moving, and then it will reappear when it's done. And to better show this off, let's go back into Move Object. I'm going to make this player face to the left again, and I'm going to move it 90 dots this time. And I'm going to hit OK and playtest. And we'll see that the player is not seen until it hits 90 dots. So if we are to exit this and go back into Move Object, we will go to the next option, which is Stop Object Actions During Move. Now, by object actions, it's referring to if you have a first state and then you add a link, let's just say, and I'll make it unconditional, to a second state, that the movement will not go to another action until the movement is done. Now, there's a few things to know about this option first, and that is what object is it talking about? Because this MoveBot actually moves the professor. So is it the MoveBot actions that won't continue, or is it the professor's object's actions that won't continue? And it is going to be the object that is moving. Their actions will not continue until the movement is done. And we will see this. For instance, if I hit OK and I show you just what's going on in this object, the first state is it's going to move the professor. It has an unconditional change instantly into the apply filter to itself. Now, move object, it runs and then it instantly goes down. The move object doesn't wait for it to get done on its own. So if we were to hit playtest, we'll see that it instantly starts filtering itself even though the professor object has not finished moving. I'll hit F5 again and you'll see that it instantly starts to filter before the movement's done. Now, if we go back into move object and we change this to the MoveBot itself, or you could do object self. Let's do object self for this purpose. And we still have stop object actions. If we hit OK and hit playtest, we'll see that the MoveBot moves and then it goes into its actions. So that's the important thing to note with this object action or stop object actions, is that it affects the object that is moving. And also just to point out real quick is that by actions, it doesn't mean runtime actions. So if you had like 5 runtime actions below move object and you had this option selected, it would still run those 5 runtimes in this state. The one thing it just won't do is it won't go to the next action. These transition links will be void basically until the movement is done, and then it will go about its business. All right, so now we can go to the next state, stop object animations during move. Now this is very similar to the actions, except for it's with the animations. So if you have a looping idle or a looping movement animation, it will freeze the frame that it started and it won't start animating again until after the movement. If we hit OK and we hit, let's skip the filter and we hit play, we'll see that the NuveBot is paused until it reaches its destination. Now, again, it's the same as the stop object action where the object it's talking about is the one that's actually moving. So if we were to do the professor again, hit OK and play test, we'll see that the professor now is not doing its idle walking. And we can see that again right here. So that leaves us with the last option to go over, and that is attach moved object to the grid. This is going to be the object that we are moving. I'm going to change it to the chair object, and we're going to hit OK and just play test and see what happens. And before I do this, I'm going to hit F1, go to debug and show the grid. This shows the grid on the playtest. I'm going to hit F5 and we'll see the chair movement, and then we'll see it snap to the grid at the end of its movement. It does a little snap right here. Now, the one thing I don't know how to explain is what is the priority of the grid. You'll just have to play around with the positioning and see exactly where it's going to fall in place. I don't know if it goes by the wall tile and how that affects, like, see how I have a smaller wall tile on the chair? How does it affect a 16 by 16 grid, which is what my tiles are? Those are questions that will just need a little bit of tinkering around on your own to figure that out. All right, so I'm going to turn off the grid here and exit and go back into move object. I'm going to take off attach move object to the grid, and I'm going to leave the default just as is, except for I will not set the object to move, and I'm going to hit OK. And now we're going to click on changeable even after placement on scene icon. And with that selected, we can go to the scene. We can click on our MoveBot, and we can now specify this runtime even further for this particular instance. And there's a few options that we get while doing the move object on the scene. For instance, if we click on set coordinate and move, we don't just get the option to set the X and set the Y, we can also now click the scene, and we can click the scene and it gives us the coordinates right away. And now if we were to set this to object self and clicked play, we'll see that the MoveBot is now moving towards those coordinates. The other thing that we can do different by having this changeable on scene is, say that we wanted to move to the professor. Well, we can say single, and by single, it's just going to do the very first instance of that object. But then we can also go further and choose the individual objects. So if we were to, let's say, move Professor Baz here and copy paste another Professor Baz, if we were to leave it on single, it would auto default to the first professor. So it would do the very first one that's top on the list. So if I move this 1 above professor, it would now be the 1, but it would be professor because it's above. But we can select Professor 1 now, and instead of moving towards this one, it will now move towards this particular professor. So that's that for moving to the center. We can also set an object, so we can move the professor, and we want to move the professor, let's just say uh, 30 pixels to the left, we can now specify which professor, or we can do all of them, which the all and the single, these are options inside the objects tab as well. But to get these specific instances, you have to have it changeable on scene even after placement. So that's the uniqueness is getting these options. So let's try it here. We can move, let's say we want to move Professor 1 and to the left by 30 dots. And we hit play test and we moved that particular instance over. And then, as always, the really cool thing about this is you can have multiple move bots and you can have them all doing different things. So this one I want to move to right here and I want it to move itself. And then get another one, and on this one I want to move the chair to the left 120, and I want to do it within a set frame of 20.2. If we click play, all of those things are going to happen, and it really specified the scene a lot more. So this is it for the move object runtime. If I missed something, or if you know other ways that this is useful, please feel free to leave a comment down below. We'll start making a history on these videos of good ways to use this, or obviously things that I've missed. And we will see you at the next video.